All right, so let's get started. So first thing we do, step one, move all the terms over to one side of the equation. Put the terms in standard, I don't know, that line's really small, standard form. And so here's my equation, x squared minus 14 equals 5x. I want to move everything over so it's on one side of the equation because technically I need to get this equal to 0. So how would I move 5x to the other side? Subtract. So that's the first thing I'm going to do. I need to move everything to the other side. There are no x's. I know either in standard form, the x goes in the middle. So I know I'm going to put it right there. There's nothing I can combine it with. So my new equation is x squared. Yeah, because it's x squared, then x, then the constant. And we'll be practicing with that. So one of your Delta Math homeworks for tonight is just moving things over like that. So just practicing moving things over so it's all on one side. And Charlie told me we're getting the x-intercept, the x-coordinate of our x-intercepts. What's always the y-coordinate? Anyone know? 0. That's why we're trying to make this equal to 0, because we're trying to get our x-intercept. Then we factor like we normally do. So is there a number that goes into all three of these? No. So we just start our A, B, C. So what's our A here? 1. Our B, -5. Good. And our C, -14. Then we do our X. So 1 times -14 is -14. And we're adding to -5. So let's list the numbers that multiply to -14, or some of you guys can just think of the two numbers that multiply to -14, add to -5. So I know 14. What two numbers can add to 14 or multiply to 14? And I know one of them has to be negative, so I'll make each of them negative. What else? What's the last one? -14 and 1, -1 and 14. Out of those, which one adds to -5? Ding, ding, ding. And so remember, you guys don't need to do that every time. If you can think of it on your own, you don't need to list them. So then I write it like this, x minus 7 and x plus 2. And just to get you in the habit of it, what is our A here? What's our A? 1. So you can put 1 underneath. I just want to show you. I would do it every time rather than not do it at all. Because we know it just ends up being x minus 7, x plus 2. But that's why we didn't go over that, because anything divided by 1 is just that same. Cool. Step 3, make each factor equal to 0 and solve, because technically it looks like this. Here's my factored form. And so now we just make each of these factors equal to 0 and solve. So I'm going to make x minus 7 equal to 0 and x plus 2 equal to 0. And so this is the only new part right here, besides moving it over. And so how do I get x by itself here? What's the inverse of minus 7? Add 7 plus 7. And so you end up getting x equals 7. And over here you would subtract 2 on both sides. And you end up getting x equals -2. And so your answers right as coordinates. Nope, I didn't divide because there's nothing next to x. It's just x equals 7. Right here, you mean? Right there, technically I did, because 7 divided by 1 when I reduce that is just 7. And you don't have to do that when a equals 1, but I'd rather you do it every time than forget to do it when a is greater than 1. So Charlie told me this is my x-coordinate of my intercept, and what's the y-coordinate? 0. So these are your two x-intercepts, and -2, comma 0. Make sure they're two different points. So that's where they cross the x-axis. That's the whole point of that, to find your x-axis. Yes, we may go. Any questions on this? So this is all we're practicing today. We're going to try one more together. Does everyone have this down? So that worksheet that's on your desk is a little coloring worksheet. And all it is, looks something like this. And all it is you're moving everything over to one side and then solving for your factors. So some of them are going to look a little bit different. So I'm going to go over 10 with you. So go to number 10. So go to number 10, it's on the back. And so I gave you room to do your work. So this says x squared minus 19x. It's multiple choice. So you're figuring out which one is correct. So like say this ended up being red, then I would color all the 10s red on the next page. I gave you two. So I'm going to move everything over to one side. So how would I move 2x squared over here? Minus or subtract, but now I could combine it with something. I could combine it with 8x squared. And so what is 8 minus 2? 6x squared. Minus 19x equals negative 1x. How do I get negative 1 or 1x over here? Add it. And so I could combine it with this one. And you end up getting 6x squared minus 18x equals 0, which is what I want. I want y to always be 0. This is number 10. Then I see, right here, you guys see how there's not a constant? So our GCF is now going to have a letter. Well, first of all, what number goes into 6 and 18? 3. So that would technically be our AB. But first we're going to find GCF. And so we know that 3 goes into both of them, but that's not the biggest one. What is the biggest number that goes into both? 6. So our greatest common factor would be 6. And we know 6 goes on the outside of our parentheses. What letter do they both have?
X.
X. So I'm going to put an X right here. And that will also go outside of my parentheses. Then we divide. So 6 divided by 6 is just 1, or an x squared divided by x, it just looks something like this. Or you could subtract it, just like we added the exponents when we multiplied. Now we're subtracting. What's 2 minus 1? 1. So just 1x. It looks something like this, sorry. So just 1x is left, minus, what's 18 divided by 6? 3, and the x is, what's 1 minus 1? 0. They cross out. And so now it's already factored for us. Our first factor is 6x, like this, and our second factor is x minus 3. So now all you have to do is make them both equal to 0. So I have 6x equals 0, and x minus 3 equals 0. How do I get x by itself right here? Not subtract. Divide, right? And so when I divide, 0 divided by anything equals what number? 0. So I know one of my x-intercepts is 0, 0. Or what's that called? What's the vocabulary word? Origin. Good. To get 3 to the other side, what do I do? Add 3. And you end up getting x equals 3. So your x-intercept would be 3, 0. So which color says my x-intercepts are 0 and 3? And see, it's written with this little bracket thing, which means those are your 2 x-intercepts. So right here would be my answer. It's multiple choice. And so I would know when I go to my coloring sheet, all the 10s I would color red. So when you get to that next sheet, you would go to the coloring sheet, and all the number 10s you would color red. Does that make sense? Do you guys want me to go over one more? Okay, I'll go over one more. So let's go over. Sure, we can go over 12. So first I'm going to write the problem down. And then I move everything over. So Ibu, how do I get x squared over to this side? And I'm going to put a 1 right there. So I'm going to subtract, but now I can combine it with this one. What is 9 minus 1? Good. 8x squared.
It was always you had to rewrite.
I rewrote it right here.
I was on the front line.
When you rewrite it, see how the squares, x squared always comes first. And so like if this were 15, I would move it to the back because it would be a constant. And then Charlie, how do I get 4x over to that side? How do I move it? I'm going to subtract 4x, and I can combine it with this guy right here. And you end up getting 8x squared minus 14x equals 0. So now I see there's not a constant, but my next thing I need to look for is the greatest common factor. First, what's the biggest number that goes into 8 and 14? 8 doesn't go into 14. 2, right? Because 4 doesn't go into 14. So 2 is the biggest number that goes into both. And what letter do they both have? X.
You have to put it in
This 2x, you mean? Yeah. Because technically your answer is going to look like this. Because that is one of the factors. Then we divide. So what's 8 divided by 2? 4. And x squared divided by x, remember we just subtract the exponent. So what's 2 minus 1? 1x minus, and these x's cross out. What's 14 divided by 2?
7.
Cool. So it looks something like that. Last thing we do is we make both factors equal to 0. So I have over here 2x equals 0, which automatically I know one of my x-intercepts is 0, 0. And 4x minus 7 equals 0. So how do I get x by itself over here? Divide, and you automatically get x equals 0. So one of them is 0, 0, which is your, what vocabulary word? Origin. And then how do you get x by itself here? Yep, add 7 to this two-step equation. And what's 0 plus 7? 7. I get 4x equals 7. Then what do? Divide. And your answer is just x equals 7 over 4. So your answer would be 7 over 4, 0. Which one has that? The first answer or the second answer? The second. So that means I would take all the 12s and I'd color them light purple on your picture on you. Does that make sense? Cool. So you guys are going to work on that. And what could you do with your answer choices, especially since you have your final coming up? What could you do with your answer choices to make sure they're right? Plug it in. So I could sit there and plug in 3 for this whole equation up here like this. 8 parentheses 3 squared minus 19 times 3. And it should equal when I plug in 3 over here. And if it equals each other, I know I got the answer right. So focus also, because remember, your final is all multiple choice. So you want to make sure, like, if you totally forget how to do this, what could we always do with our answer choice? Plug it in, plug it in. And so if that's a skill you want to work on right now, but I want to make sure you get everything to one side and solve. So that's your classwork for today. Your check for understanding's on there too, or on the bottom. But I just want to show you your Delta Math real quick, because you'll have time to work on that today. So on the board, you can see your test is next Thursday already. And then you have, like, we have 2 days to review for your final, and you have your final. So here's 6.2. Your test is, your Unit 6 test is next week, and then your finals the next week on Tuesday. You're on your first final that you're going to have, because your first period. So here is 6.4 is not up here. Let me edit it. And so you'll have time to work on these delta mass too. So if maybe you want to practice factoring, and if you want to work on that now and rather do the paper for homework, you can do that too. That's fine with me. Make sure you're doing it on a computer. So 6 point, where is it? I do. I'll give you one in a second. I'll just try to figure out what's going on here. Okay, so here's what the 6.4 looks like. Never mind. I don't know where it is. I'll figure it out in a second.